A family's quiet night is interrupted by an unexpected polar bear visitor. What happens when they come face to face will leave you astonished. And if you cherish your family and love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and avoid 10 years of bad luck. The Johnson family's SUV crawled up the snowy mountain road, its headlights cutting through the growing darkness. Mike gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white as he navigated the treacherous path. In the passenger seat, Lisa checked their location on the GPS one more time, though the signal had become increasingly unreliable as they ascended into the Colorado mountains. "Are we there yet?" Jake called from the back seat for what felt like the 100th time. At 12, he was old enough to understand the journey's challenges, but young enough to be impatient. His 9-year-old sister Mia giggled beside him, wrapped in her favorite purple blanket. "Just another mile," Mike answered, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The first snowflakes had started to fall, small at first, but growing larger with each passing minute. The weather forecast had warned of an approaching storm, but they hadn't expected it to arrive so quickly. The cabin finally appeared around a bend, a solid wooden structure standing against the darkening sky. The family burst into relieved laughter as Mike pulled up to the front door. Their weekend getaway from Denver's bustling streets was about to begin, though none of them could have predicted just how memorable it would become. "Last one inside is a frozen snowman," Mia shouted, practically leaping from the car the moment it stopped. Jake was right behind her, their earlier car ride restlessness transforming into excited energy. "Careful on the steps," Lisa called out, but the children were already racing to the cabin's entrance, their boots leaving fresh tracks in the thin layer of snow. Mike retrieved the keys from the property manager's lockbox while Lisa began unloading their supplies from the trunk. Inside, the cabin was cold but welcoming. Mike immediately went to work on the fireplace, arranging logs and kindling with practiced movements. The cabin's previous occupants had left plenty of firewood stacked neatly beside the stone hearth. Lisa flicked on lights and began unpacking their groceries in the small but well-equipped kitchen, while Jake and Mia explored every corner of their temporary home. "Mom, there's a huge window in our room," Mia's voice echoed from down the hallway. "We can see the whole forest, and there's bunk beds," Jake added, the excitement clear in his voice. The sounds of their footsteps thundered through the cabin as they continued their exploration. The first flames caught in the fireplace, and warmth slowly began to spread through the main room. Outside, the snowfall had intensified, thick flakes now visible in the porch light. Mike moved methodically through the cabin, checking windows and doors, making sure everything was secure. The weather forecast had predicted up to 2 feet of snow overnight, and he wanted to ensure they were properly prepared. Lisa pulled out bread and sandwich fixings, knowing the kids would be hungry after the long drive. The familiar domestic sounds of plates being set on the counter and the refrigerator door opening and closing created a sense of normalcy, despite their unfamiliar surroundings. A particularly strong gust of wind rattled the windows, causing both children to freeze in their tracks. The storm was picking up faster than expected, and the wind's howl had taken on an almost animal-like quality. Mia abandoned her exploration and moved closer to the fireplace, pulling one of the cabin's thick blankets around her shoulders. "Maybe we should tell stories," Jake suggested, trying to sound brave for his sister's benefit, though he too had moved closer to the fire's warmth and light. The wind continued to grow stronger, its force making the cabin's wooden beams creak and groan. Mike finished his security check and joined his family in the main room, accepting a sandwich from Lisa with a grateful smile. The 4 of them huddled near the fireplace, the storm's intensifying sounds creating an unintended soundtrack to their evening. None of them could have known that the approaching storm would be the least of their concerns, or that their simple family getaway was about to become an adventure that would change their lives forever. The howling wind outside made the perfect backdrop for storytelling. Lisa gathered everyone closer to the fireplace, arranging cushions in a circle while the flames cast dancing shadows on the cabin walls. The temperature outside had dropped significantly, but inside, the fire kept them warm and cozy. "Who wants to start?" Lisa asked, wrapping an afghan around her shoulders. She noticed how Jake and Mia kept glancing nervously at the windows whenever a particularly strong gust rattled the glass. They needed a distraction, and she knew from experience that stories were the best way to capture their attention. Mike cleared his throat and leaned forward. Remember that camping trip we took to Yellowstone last summer? The children's eyes immediately lit up with recognition. Well, there's something I never told you about the last night we were there. Mia scooted closer to her father, her earlier fears temporarily forgotten. What happened, Dad? Well, Mike began, lowering his voice dramatically. It was around midnight, and I had to step out of the tent to, you know. He winked, and the kids giggled. The moon was so bright that night, it was almost like daylight. As I was walking back to our campsite, I saw something moving between the trees. Jake leaned forward, completely engrossed. Was it a bear? No, but good guess. It was a whole family of elk, a mother and 2 babies, just like our family. They were so quiet, moving through the forest like shadows. I stood there for what felt like hours, just watching them. They had no idea I was there. Lisa jumped in, building on Mike's momentum. That reminds me of the time I saw a mountain lion while hiking with Aunt Sarah. She noticed how both children's eyes widened at the mention of the predator. We were on the trail near Boulder, and there it was just lounging on a rock about 50 feet away, sunning itself like a house cat. Were you scared? Mia whispered, clutching her blanket tighter. Terrified at first, Lisa admitted. But then something amazing happened. The mountain lion looked right at us, yawned, and went back to sleep. It made me realize that sometimes the things we fear aren't as dangerous as we imagine. Jake, feeling braver now, decided to contribute. Remember when we saw those deer last month? The ones in the backyard. His voice grew animated as he described the scene. There were 3 of them, and the baby deer was trying to eat Mom's roses. And Mom was so mad. Mia kaimdin, giggling. She ran outside in her pajamas, waving her arms. The family laughed together, the sound of their mirth mixing with the crackling of the fire. The storm outside seemed less threatening now, reduced to background noise as they shared their memories and embellished their tales. The baby deer was so cute, though. Lisa defended herself, smiling at the memory. Even if it did destroy my prize-winning roses. Sometimes you have to appreciate the beauty of wild things, even when they're causing trouble. Mike was about to start another story when it happened. A thunderous crash echoed through the cabin, so loud and sudden that it cut through their laughter like a knife. The sound came from the direction of the front door, and it was nothing like the wind they'd been hearing all evening. The family froze, their storytelling circle suddenly feeling very exposed. Mia grabbed Jake's hand, while Lisa and Mike exchanged quick, concerned glances. The crash was followed by a sound they couldn't quite identify, something between a scrape and a thud. Dad! Jake's voice wavered slightly. What was that? Mike stood up slowly, positioning himself between his family and the cabin's entrance. Probably just a branch blown down by the storm, he said, trying to sound confident. But his eyes remained fixed on the door, and his body was tense. Another sound followed, closer this time. It was deliberate, heavy, definitely not a branch. The wooden floor of the cabin's porch creaked under what had to be significant weight. Lisa pulled the children closer to her. Their earlier lighthearted mood completely evaporated. The wind continued to howl outside, but now they could hear something else beneath it. Something breathing. Something large. Standing on their porch, right outside their door. None of them spoke. The stories of wildlife encounters that had seemed so entertaining just moments ago took on a different meaning entirely. The comfortable family circle around the fireplace had transformed into a huddle, all eyes fixed on the cabin's entrance, waiting. Whatever was out there, it was about to change their evening and their lives in ways none of them could have anticipated. The door burst open with such force that it slammed against the interior wall. A blast of frigid air and snow swept into the cabin, temporarily blinding the family. When they could see again, their minds struggled to process what stood in the doorway. A massive polar bear, its white fur dusted with snow, its dark eyes scanning the room with unsettling intelligence. Time seemed to stop. The bear filled the entire doorframe, standing at least 10 feet tall on its hind legs. Steam rose from its breath in the cold air, and droplets of melted snow fell from its thick fur onto the wooden floor. The smell of wet animal and Arctic cold invaded the previously cozy space. Mike's first instinct was to grab Mia, while Lisa pulled Jake behind her. They backed away slowly, inching toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. The bear dropped to all fours and took a step inside, its massive paws leaving wet prints on the floor. Its nose twitched, and its head turned toward the kitchen where their leftover sandwiches still sat on the counter. "Nobody move," Mike whispered, his voice barely audible. His mind raced through everything he knew about bear encounters. But this was different. Polar bears weren't supposed to be in Colorado. This had to be some sort of nightmare. The bear's attention shifted to their movement, and it made a low sound in its throat. Not quite a growl, but not friendly either. Its eyes locked onto the family, and they could see the intelligence behind that gaze. This wasn't just a hungry animal. There was something more in the way it studied them. Mia whimpered softly, and Jake squeezed her hand. The children, pressed against the wall behind their parents, showed remarkable composure despite their terror. The bear took another step forward, and the floorboards creaked under its weight. Lisa's mind was working overtime, analyzing the situation with the clarity that often comes in moments of extreme stress. The bear's movements weren't aggressive. They were cautious, almost hesitant. Its fur looked matted in places, and she could see its ribs slightly showing through its coat. This wasn't a healthy, well-fed bear. "Mike," she whispered, her eyes never leaving the bear. "It's hungry and lost." She reached slowly for her husband's arm, an idea forming. Years of working with troubled kids in her teaching job had taught her that fear often masked need, and aggression usually came from desperation. Mike glanced at his wife, reading her intention in her expression. It was crazy. Everything about this situation was crazy, but something in the bear's behavior made him pause. It hadn't charged them. It hadn't roared or shown typical predatory behavior. Instead, it stood there almost waiting. The fire crackled in the thigh. "Replace," and the bear's head swung toward the sound. In that moment, Lisa saw something that confirmed her instinct. The bear flinched at the sudden noise. This wasn't an apex predator bearing down on prey. This was a lost creature seeking shelter from the storm. "Children," Lisa said softly, keeping her voice calm and steady. "Very slowly, we're going to show our friend that we're not a threat." She felt Jake and Mia's grip on her clothes tighten, but they didn't protest. Mike wanted to object. Every rational part of his brain screamed that this was madness, but he trusted his wife's judgment. In their 15 years of marriage, her intuition had rarely been wrong, even if her methods sometimes seemed unorthodox. The bear watched them, its head tilted slightly, as if trying to understand their quiet conversation. Its nose continued to work, sampling the air, likely drawn by the food smells from their earlier meal. In that frozen moment, as the family stood pressed against the wall and the polar bear stood in their cabin, something shifted in the atmosphere. The initial panic began to give way to something else. Not comfort, exactly, but a strange sort of understanding. The bear's posture relaxed slightly, and its breathing became more regular. Lisa took a small step forward, ignoring Mike's attempt to pull her back. "Hello," she said softly, using the same tone she used with frightened children on their first day of school. The bear's ears twitched at her voice, and its eyes fixed on her face. What happened next would change the Johnson family's understanding of wildlife, nature, and their own capacity for courage forever. But first, they had to survive the next few minutes, as human and bear decided whether to be enemies or something entirely unexpected. The next few moments unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. Lisa kept her eyes on the bear while slowly reaching toward the kitchen counter. The bear tracked her movement, but remained surprisingly still, its only motion the steady rise and fall of its massive chest as it breathed. "Jake," Lisa whispered, her voice steady despite the situation, "hand me that plate of sandwiches." Very slowly, she could feel Mike's tension beside her, ready to pull her back at the first sign of aggression from their unexpected guest. Jake's hand trembled as he reached for the plate, but he managed to pass it to his mother without dropping anything. The bear's attention immediately focused on the food, its nose working overtime, but it didn't move forward. It was showing remarkable restraint for a creature of its size and strength. "What exactly are you planning?" Mike whispered, his voice tense but controlled. He kept his body positioned to shield Mia, who had gone completely quiet, her eyes wide as she watched the scene unfold. "We make a peace offering," Lisa responded, her teacher's instincts kicking in. "Think about it, Mike. A polar bear in Colorado? It must have traveled hundreds of miles. It's obviously starving and confused." With deliberate movements, Lisa placed several sandwiches on a separate plate. The bear watched every motion, its dark eyes intelligent and focused. She could see now that its fur was matted in places, and its frame, while still massive, showed signs of malnourishment. "Mom," Jake whispered, his initial fear giving way to curiosity. "Polar bears aren't supposed to be here. Could it have escaped from somewhere?" "I don't know, honey," Lisa responded honestly. "But right now, that's not important. What's important is that it's here, and it needs help." Mike had retrieved his camera from their bags, moving slowly so as not to startle the bear. Despite the surreal danger of the situation, his photographer's instinct told him this was a moment that needed to be documented. The bear's eyes flicked to him as he raised the camera, but showed no signs of aggression. Lisa took a careful step forward, holding the plate of sandwiches. The bear's nose. He twitched, but it remained surprisingly calm. She placed the plate on the floor and backed away slowly. The bear looked at the food, then at Lisa, then back at the food as if seeking permission. "It's okay," Lisa said softly, using the same gentle tone she used with frightened children on their first day of school. "Go ahead." The bear approached the plate with surprising delicacy for such a massive creature. It sniffed the sandwiches carefully before taking one in its mouth. The family watched in amazement as it ate with what could almost be described as politeness, not scattering the food or making a mess. Mia, who had been frozen in fear until now, suddenly giggled. "It eats neater than Jake does," she whispered, and the tension in the room broke slightly. Even Mike couldn't suppress a small smile. The bear finished the sandwiches and looked up at them expectantly. In the firelight, its eyes seemed almost golden, and there was something in its gaze that spoke of intelligence and awareness that went beyond mere animal instinct. "I think," Lisa said slowly, "we might have some leftover stew in the cooler. Jake, would you help me?" "Move very slowly." Jake nodded, his fear now mixed with fascination. As he helped his mother prepare another plate of food, the bear settled into a sitting position, its massive frame somehow making the cabin's living room seem smaller, yet less threatening. Mike continued taking photos, his professional eye capturing the surreal scene. His wife and son preparing food for a polar bear, while his daughter watched with growing wonder. The camera's quiet clicks provided a counterpoint to the storm still raging outside. The situation remained dangerous. They were still in a cabin with one of the world's most powerful predators, but something had shifted. What had started as a moment of terror was transforming into something else entirely, something none of them could have anticipated when they planned their weekend getaway. None of them knew it yet, but this strange dinner party was just the beginning of an even more extraordinary night. While the bear finished its second helping of food, Jake quietly retrieved his sketchbook from his backpack. The 12-year-old had been taking art classes at school, and his teacher had encouraged him to practice drawing from life. Though she probably hadn't anticipated this particular scenario, the bear's attention shifted to Jake's movement, watching as he settled cross-legged on the floor at a respectful distance. Mia, emboldened by the bear's continued peaceful behavior, scooted closer to her brother to watch him draw. "Look how its fur catches the firelight," Jake whispered to his sister, his pencil moving across the paper. Despite his hand shaking slightly, he managed to capture the bear's massive form with surprising accuracy. The bear tilted its head, seemingly curious about the scratching sound of pencil on paper. Lisa watched the scene unfold, her teacher's mind processing the extraordinary educational opportunity unfolding before them. "Mia, why don't you get your colored pencils? You could draw too." Mia nodded eagerly and retrieved her art supplies. The bear's eyes followed her movement, but its posture remained relaxed. When she returned, she spread her materials on the floor and began drawing alongside her brother. "The eyes," Mia murmured, selecting a dark brown pencil. "They're not scary anymore. They looked sad. She worked intently, her young face scrunched in concentration as she tried to capture the bear's expression. The bear, having finished its meal, shifted its massive body to face the children directly. Instead of inspiring fear, the movement now sparked interest. It stretched its neck forward slightly, examining the colorful pencils scattered on the floor. Mike continued documenting the scene with his camera, though he kept one hand ready to grab the children if needed. But the bear's behavior continued to defy everything. G thought he knew about these Arctic predators. Its movements were deliberate and gentle, almost careful. "Dad," Jake called softly, "look at this." He held up his sketch, a remarkably detailed rendering of the bear's face. The bear's gaze fixed on the drawing, and to everyone's amazement, it made a soft huffing sound and leaned closer. "I think it recognizes itself," Lisa whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. She had taught enough children to recognize the moment of connection when it happened, even if she'd never expected to see it with a polar bear. Mia, encouraged by the bear's reaction, held up her own drawing. Her version was more childlike, but captured something essential about the bear's expression, a mixture of weariness and gentleness that seemed impossible for such a fearsome creature. The bear's response stunned them all. It reached out one massive paw, not toward the drawings, but toward the scattered colored pencils. With delicacy that seemed impossible for such a large creature, it nudged a bright blue pencil, watching as it rolled across the wooden floor. "Mom," Mia breathed, "I think it wants to play." Lisa felt tears prick at her eyes. In 15 years of teaching, she'd seen countless moments of connection between unlikely friends. But this was something entirely different. This was nature and humanity finding common ground in the most unexpected way. Jake started a new sketch, this time narrating as he drew. "See, this is you," he told the bear, his voice gaining confidence. "And these are the mountains outside. Is that where you came from?" The bear watched intently as the picture took shape, its eyes moving between Jake's hand and the emerging image. When Jake drew a simple outline of the cabin, the bear made another soft sound, almost like a grunt of recognition. Mike lowered his camera, moving to sit beside Lisa. "I've photographed wildlife for 20 years," he whispered, "and I've never seen anything like this. It's like it understands." Lisa squeezed his hand. "Maybe it does. Maybe we're the ones who need to understand more." The lesson wasn't lost on any of them. Here, in a cabin in the Colorado mountains, surrounded by a raging winter storm, they were experiencing something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the divide between humans and wildlife. Mia started a new drawing, this time of the bear sitting with their family around the fireplace. As she worked, the bear settled into a more comfortable position, its massive body relaxed but alert, its eyes reflecting both the firelight and something else, something that looked remarkably like contentment. The storm continued to howl outside, but inside the cabin, an extraordinary bridge was being built between species, one crayon stroke at a time. The evening had stretched into night, and despite the extraordinary circumstances, exhaustion began to show on everyone's faces. The bear, too, seemed more subdued, its massive head occasionally drooping before jerking back up alertly. Lisa noticed the change in their visitor's behavior first. The bear's gaze kept drifting to the still open door, where the storm had begun to ease slightly. The howling wind had decreased to a steady whisper, and the snowfall had lightened enough to reveal patches of dark sky between the clouds. "I think," she said softly, "our friend needs to go." The words caught in her throat, surprising her with their emotional weight. What had started as a terrifying intrusion had transformed into something almost magical, and the thought of ending it brought an unexpected sadness. The bear seemed to understand. It rose slowly to its feet, its full height once again impressive, but no longer frightening. Jake and Mia scrambled to gather their drawings, selecting the best ones with urgent whispers. "Can we give them to it?" Mia asked, clutching her favorite sketch, the one of the bears sitting with their family. "So it won't forget us?" Mike started Ed to explain why that might not be practical, but before he could, the bear made the decision for them. With the same surprising gentleness it had shown all evening, it extended its nose toward the drawings. Mia, showing complete trust that would have terrified her parents just hours ago, held out her artwork. The bear carefully took the paper in its mouth, handling it as delicately as if it were made of glass. Jake added his most detailed sketch to his sister's offering, and the bear accepted that as well, creating a strange but touching image. A polar bear holding children's artwork in its massive jaws. "Wait," Lisa said suddenly, hurrying to the kitchen. She returned with a bundle wrapped in butcher paper, the remainder of their food supplies. "For your journey," she explained, placing the package near the door. "Wherever you're going." The bear's dark eyes met hers, and in that moment, Lisa could have sworn she saw gratitude in their depths. It carefully set the children's drawings on top of the food bundle, ensuring they wouldn't blow away. Mike raised his camera one final time, capturing this last impossible moment. Their family standing together, watching as one of nature's most powerful predators prepared to leave their cabin as peacefully as an old friend departing after dinner. The bear paused at the threshold, turning its massive head to look back at them one last time. In the dim light, its white fur seemed to glow, creating an almost ethereal image against the dark night beyond. "Goodbye," Mia whispered, and Jake echoed her farewell. The bear huffed softly, a sound they'd come to recognize as friendly over the course of the evening. Then, with surprising grace for such a large creature, it gathered the bundle and drawings in its mouth and stepped out into the snowy night. They watched from the doorway as it moved down the cabin steps and into the darkness, its white form quickly blending with the snowy landscape until it disappeared completely. Mike finally closed the door, and the family stood in silence for a long moment. The cabin seemed somehow larger and emptier without their unexpected guest, yet filled with the lingering energy of what they'd experienced. "Did that really happen?" Jake asked, his voice slightly shaky. "Did we really just have dinner with a polar bear?" Lisa pulled both children into a hug while Mike wrapped his arms around all of them. "It happened," she confirmed, "and I don't think any of us will ever be quite the same." The fire had burned low in the fireplace, casting soft shadows around the room. Evidence of their extraordinary evening was everywhere. The wet paw prints on the floor, the scattered art supplies, the empty plates that had held their peace offering. "Mom," Mia said suddenly, her voice thick with realization, "we helped it, didn't we? It was lost and hungry and scared, and we helped it." "Yes, sweetheart," Lisa answered, smoothing her daughter's hair. "But I think it helped us too. It showed us something important about fear and trust and understanding." Mike nodded, looking at the photos on his camera's display screen. "Sometimes," he said thoughtfully, "the most amazing experiences come from choosing not to run from what scares us." The family remained huddled together, each lost in their own thoughts about the evening's events. None of them could have predicted that their weekend getaway would include hosting a polar bear, yet somehow it felt right, as if this impossible encounter had been meant to teach them something about themselves and their relationship with the natural world. What they didn't know was that their extraordinary evening was about to have even greater implications than they could imagine. The next morning arrived with surprising brightness, sunlight reflecting off the fresh snow that blanketed everything in sight. The storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape and a family forever changed by their extraordinary end. Despite their late evening, everyone was up early. The children sat at the cabin's wooden table, surrounded by paper and art supplies, their excitement palpable as they worked to capture every detail of their experience while it was still fresh in their minds. "Did you know," Jake announced, hunched over his tablet where he'd been researching since dawn, "that polar bears can smell seals from up to a kilometer away, and they're actually classified as marine mammals?" His voice carried the enthusiasm of someone discovering a whole new world of knowledge. Mia looked up from her detailed drawing of the bear, examining their artwork. "But what was it doing here? Polar bears live in the Arctic, not Colorado." Her brow furrowed with concern. "Do you think it was lost?" Lisa, preparing breakfast in the kitchen, exchanged meaningful looks with Mike. They'd spent half the night discussing the same questions, trying to make sense of their encounter. "That's a really good question, honey," she said, "and I think it's leading us towards something important." Mike set his camera down on the table, where he'd been reviewing the previous night's photos. The images were extraordinary, clear, detailed shots that captured not just the bear's physical presence, but the remarkable interaction that had unfolded. One particular photo showed the bear gently examining Mia's artwork, its expression almost gentle despite its fearsome natural appearance. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about submitting these photos to the National Wildlife Federation. Not just the photos, but our whole story. Something brought that bear here, and we need to understand why." Jake's eyes lit up. "My science teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, he's always talking about climate change affecting wildlife. Could that be why the bear was so far south?" Lisa nodded, impressed by her son's connection. "That's very possible, Jake. And it makes what happened last night even more significant." Mia had started a new drawing, this one showing the bear against a background of melting ice. Despite her young age, she seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. "We have to help them," she declared with the simple certainty of a child. "Not just our bear, but all of them." "Our bear," Mike repeated softly, the phrase striking him. Less than 12 hours ago, we were terrified of it. Now look at us planning how to protect its species." Lisa sat down at the table, her teacher's mind already formulating plans. "What if we turn this into something bigger? Jake, you mentioned Mr. Rodriguez. What if we developed a presentation for your school about conservation and climate change? Could we use Dad's photos?" Jake asked excitedly. "And our drawings? We could show everyone how gentle the bear was, how smart it was, and I can tell them about how it liked our art." Mia Kaimdin. "Maybe if other kids understand, they'll want to help too." The energy in the room was building, their shared experience transforming into purpose. Mike started making notes on his phone, contacts in wildlife photography circles, conservation organizations that might be interested in their story. "You know what really strikes me?" Lisa said, looking at her family with pride. "Last night, we had every reason to panic, to call for help, to try to drive the bear away. Instead, we chose to understand, to help. And look what we learned." Jake nodded seriously. "It's like when you tell us not to judge people before we know them, Mom. We could have just seen a scary bear, but we saw someone who needed help instead. And it trusted us," Mia added, putting the finishing touches on her drawing, even though it was probably scared too. The morning sun continued to stream through the cabin windows, illuminating the family as they planned and dreamed. Their weekend getaway had transformed into something far more meaningful, a catalyst for action, understanding, and change. What they didn't realize was that their story was about to reach far beyond their family circle, touching lives and inspiring action in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The evidence of their extraordinary encounter was spread before them. Mike's stunning photographs, the children's heartfelt artwork, and most importantly, their shared determination to make a difference. Their peaceful morning of planning and discussion was about to be interrupted by something that would take their experience in an unexpected new direction. But for now, they basked in the glow of shared purpose and the knowledge that sometimes the most frightening moments can lead to the most beautiful transformations. The peaceful morning planning session was interrupted by a distinct crunching sound from outside, the unmistakable noise of heavy footsteps in deep snow. Mike's head snapped up first, his photographer's instincts instantly alert to any change in their environment. "Could it be?" Mia whispered, her eyes wide with hope and apprehension. Mike moved cautiously to the window, pushing aside the curtain for a better view. The fresh snow outside was marked with tracks, massive, distinctive prints that could only belong to one creature. They led from the tree line right up to the cabin's porch, then circled around toward the back. "Those weren't there when I checked earlier," he said, his voice tense. The tracks were fresh, the edges still sharp in the pristine snow. "Stay inside, everyone. I need to check this out." Lisa gripped his arm. "Mike, if it is the bear." She didn't need to finish the sentence. While last night's encounter had been peaceful, they couldn't assume the same would be true in daylight. "I'll be careful," he promised, reaching for his coat. "Just want to see where these tracks lead. Maybe understand why it came back. If it is our bear." Jake pressed his face against another window. "The tracks are different from last night's," he observed, his recent research evident in his analysis. "These are deeper, like it was carrying something heavy." Mike paused at the door, his hand on the knob. The memory of last night's initial terror flashed through his mind, contrasting sharply with the peaceful interaction that followed. Lisa, ke tekit. I'll just do a quick perimeter check. The cold hit him like a wall as he stepped outside. The snow was deep, at least 2 feet in places, and the air had that sharp, clean quality that only comes after a major storm. He followed the tracks carefully, his feet sinking into the bear's massive prints. The trail led around the cabin, past their parked SUV, and toward a small storage shed. Mike's heart rate increased as he noticed the shed's door was ajar, something he was certain he'd secured yesterday. "Mike!" Lisa's voice called softly from the cabin's back door. "What do you see?" He held up a hand, signaling for quiet. There was something about the tracks that bothered him. They seemed deliberate, not the random wandering of a curious animal, but purposeful movement, as if the bear had been searching for something. The shed door creaked slightly in the morning breeze. Mike approached cautiously, aware that he was potentially cornering a polar bear in a confined space. Exactly the type of situation every wildlife guide warned against. But something told him this was different. He heard movement inside the shed and froze. Not the heavy sounds he'd expect from a creature that size, but something lighter, more frantic. Small scraping noises and what sounded like paper rustling. "Dad!" Jake's urgent whisper carried across the snow. He had disobeyed orders and followed his father's tracks, clutching his sketchbook. "Look at the other prints." Mike started to tell his son to get back inside, but Jake's words registered. He looked more carefully at the snow around the shed. There, partially obscured by the bear's massive tracks, were smaller marks in the snow, prints he recognized from years of wildlife photography. "Arctic fox," he breathed in disbelief. "But that's impossible. They're not native to." His words trailed off as he remembered what else wasn't native to Colorado. The implications made his head spin. One lost Arctic animal could be explained as a fluke, but two? Something bigger was happening. Lisa appeared behind Jake, wrapping him protectively in her arms while staring at the shed. "Mike, what's going on? Should we call someone?" Before he could answer, a new sound cut through the crisp morning air, a distant rumbling that grew steadily louder. All 3 of them looked up as a helicopter appeared over the treetops, its sleek shape marking it as definitely not search and rescue. The sound spooked whatever was in the shed. The door burst open fully, and a flash of white fur darted past them. Not the massive form they'd expected, but something smaller, quicker. It vanished into the trees, just as the helicopter began to descend in the clearing beyond their cabin. Mike pulled his family close, shielding them from the swirling snow kicked up by the rotors. As the helicopter touched down, he could make out lettering on its side, Arctic Wildlife Research Institute. The morning's peaceful planning session was over. Something much bigger than their family's extraordinary encounter was unfolding, and they were somehow right in the middle of it. The helicopter's blades slowed to a stop, and the sudden silence felt heavy with anticipation. The Johnson family huddled together on their cabin's porch, watching as the aircraft's door opened and 3 figures emerged, dressed in Arctic research gear. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson?" called out a woman with silver-streaked hair, pulled back in a tight bun. She held up an ID badge. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chun from the Arctic Wildlife Research Institute. We need to talk about your visitor from last night." Mike stepped forward protectively. "How did you know about that?" "Your bear has been leaving quite a trail," another researcher, a younger man with a tablet in his hands, explained. "We've been tracking several displaced Arctic animals for months now. When we saw these posted an hour ago, we knew we had to come immediately." He turned the tablet toward them, showing a local community Facebook page. There, prominently displayed, were Jake's drawings of the bear, the ones they'd given it last night. The images had been found by a local ranger during his morning patrol, carefully placed at the entrance of the ranger station, completely dry and preserved despite the snow. The bear delivered them? Mia's voice was filled with wonder. "It wanted people to see them?" Dr. Chen nodded, her expression serious but kind. "We believe something extraordinary is happening. These Arctic animals aren't just lost, they're trying to communicate with us. Your encounter last night might be the breakthrough we've been waiting for." Lisa's teacher instincts kicked in. The way it responded to the children's art, its careful handling of the drawings, it wasn't just accepting food. It was establishing contact. Precisely, the third researcher chimed in, adjusting his glasses. We've documented similar behaviors in other displaced Arctic wildlife. Unusual attempts at human interaction, deliberate leaving of messages or objects, coordinated movements between species that normally wouldn't interact. Jake clutched his sketchbook tighter. The Arctic fox in the shed. They're working together? Dr. Chin's eyebrows shot up. You saw the fox? This is crucial information. We've been tracking a group of Arctic animals moving southward, but we couldn't understand the pattern. They're not just wandering, they're organized. Mike shared his camera's memory card with the researchers, watching as they scrolled through his photos from the previous night. Their expressions grew increasingly animated as they saw the sequence of events unfold. Look at this behavior. Ral pattern, Dr. Chin murmured to her colleagues. The careful approach, the deliberate interaction with the children's art materials, the gentle acceptance of food. This isn't just an animal seeking shelter. This is... She paused, choosing her words carefully. This is something we've never seen before. Lisa stepped forward. The children have already started researching conservation efforts. They want to help. That's actually why we're here, Dr. Chin smiled. We're not just tracking these animals. We're trying to understand why they're moving south, why they're changing their behavior, and most importantly, what they're trying to tell us about the changes in their Arctic habitat. Mia tugged at her mother's sleeve. Mom, look! She pointed toward the tree line where the fox had disappeared. There, half hidden behind a snow-laden pine, was a flash of white, the bear, watching them from a distance. The researchers followed her gesture, their expressions a mixture of excitement and disbelief. The bear wasn't running or hiding. It was observing, waiting, almost as if it wanted to ensure its message had been received. I think, Dr. Chin said slowly, your family has just become part of something much bigger than a chance encounter. These animals are reaching out, trying to bridge the gap between their world and ours. The question is, are we ready to listen? Jake was already flipping to a fresh page in his sketchbook, his pencil flying across the paper. Maybe, he said thoughtfully, that's why it came to us first. Because we were ready to see it as more than just a scary bear. The morning sun caught the snow crystals in the air, creating a momentary rainbow that arced over the cabin. In that moment, the Johnson family understood that their extraordinary night was just the beginning of an even more remarkable journey. The bear's message was clear. The line between human and animal worlds was blurring, and in that blurring lay hope for both. Their next steps would need to be careful, deliberate, and brave, just like the bear who had trusted them enough to make first contact. The cabin door suddenly burst open with a bang that made everyone jump. The researchers instinctively reached for their equipment, while Mike moved to shield his family. But what entered wasn't the bear. It was a rush of excited scientists and wildlife experts, their arms full of papers and monitoring equipment. Dr. Chin called out a breathless young researcher, waving a tablet. The satellite data just came in. You need to see this immediately. The scene that unfolded was unlike anything the Johnson family could have imagined when they'd planned their weekend getaway. Their cozy cabin had transformed into an impromptu command center, with monitors displaying migration patterns and climate data covering every available surface. Look at this. Dr. Chin pointed to a map covered in glowing dots. It's not just our bear and fox. There are dozens of Arctic species moving in coordinated patterns, all converging on areas with high human population density. But they're not attacking or scavenging. They're making contact. The scientists gathered around a large screen showing thermal imaging of the surrounding forest. The bear was still there, its massive heat signature clear against the cold background. But it wasn't alone. Scattered throughout the trees were smaller signatures, Arctic foxes, snow owls, and other creatures that had no business being in Colorado. They're choosing places where they'll be noticed, another researcher explained, pointing to similar patterns across North America. Parks, nature centers, even schools. It's like they're deliberately seeking attention, but not in a threatening way. Jake's eyes widened as he studied the data. They're asking for help, he said softly, and the room fell silent. Just like our bear did. They're showing us what's happening to their home. Dr. Chin nodded slowly. Out of the mouths of babes, she murmured. We've been so focused on the scientific anomaly that we miss the obvious. These animals aren't just displaced, they're ambassadors. The bear's distant figure moved closer to the cabin's edge, visible through the window. In the daylight, its massive form seemed less threatening and more majestic. Several Arctic foxes emerged from the trees to sit near it, their white fur gleaming in the sun. "The drawings," Lisa said suddenly. The bear didn't just take them, it delivered them to the ranger station. It wanted to prove the connection it made with the children. Mike's photos were now being analyzed by the research team's AI systems, which were detecting patterns of intentional communication in the bear's behavior. The intelligence we're seeing here goes beyond anything previously documented, one scientist explained. It's as if the climate crisis has forced them to evolve new ways of reaching out to humans. Mia, who had been quietly drawing throughout the commotion, held up her latest work. It showed the bears surrounded by other Arctic animals, all of them facing a group of humans who were reaching out their hands in friendship. "Can we help them go home?" she asked. Dr. Chen knelt beside her, studying the drawing. "Your picture shows exactly what we need to do, sweetheart. These animals are showing us that the divide between human and animal worlds isn't as wide as we thought. They're giving us a chance to fix what we've broken." The room erupted with a fresh wave of activity as the scientists began formulating plans. The Johnson family story would become the cornerstone of a new conservation initiative, combining climate science with this unprecedented example of animal-human communication. "Your weekend adventure," Dr. Chen told the family, "just changed everything we thought we knew about wildlife behavior and climate adaptation. These animals aren't just victims of climate change. They're actively seeking solutions, and they've chosen to do it by connecting with us." The bear outside lifted its massive head, meeting their gaze through the window. In the bright morning light, with the scientific equipment humming and the experts buzzing with excitement, it no longer seemed like a lost creature seeking shelter. It was a messenger, an ambassador from a changing world, asking humanity to listen before it was too late. Jake added one final detail to his latest sketch, a small note at the bottom that read, "The night we learned to listen." The bear's story, and the Johnson family's role in it, would go on to inspire a global movement of cooperation between humans and wildlife, proving that sometimes the most powerful messages come not in words, but in moments of pure, unexpected connection. As the scientists continued their work, the family stood together by the window, watching their bear, now a symbol of hope and change, standing proud among its Arctic companions. The impossible encounter that began with fear had transformed into something revolutionary, a bridge between species, built on trust, understanding, and the simple willingness to look past fear and see the truth that lay beneath. The storm had passed, but its impact would be felt for generations to come. In the end, it wasn't just about saving the Arctic animals. It was about saving ourselves and learning that the greatest adventures often begin with a single moment of choosing understanding over fear.